She signed the marriage contract with shaking hands, her signature barely legible through the blur of tears she refused to let fall. 3 hours ago, she'd been locked in her stepfather's basement. Now she sat in a lawyer's office across from a stranger whose eyes held the kind of darkness that came from living too many lifetimes. The vampire didn't smile. Didn't speak. He simply slid the papers across the mahogany desk and waited, patient as stone, while Elena made the choice between one prison and another. At least this one came with a door she could walk through. Her stepfather's voice still echoed in her ears from this morning. Worthless. Burden. Should have drowned you with your mother. 23 years of that voice. 23 years of flinching at footsteps, of making herself small and quiet and invisible. Her 2 half-sisters got college funds and weekend trips to the coast. Elena got the basement room with the lock on the outside and permission to eat leftovers if she'd scrubbed the floors well enough. When the marriage broker had approached her at the textile factory where she worked night shifts, Elena had thought it was a joke. Someone wants to marry you. A vampire from the old families. He needs a human wife for legal reasons. Something about property rights and inheritance laws. You'd live in his house. He'd pay your family a bride price. You'd want for nothing. She'd laughed. Then she'd seen the number on the contract. Enough money to make her stepfather smile for the first time in a decade. Enough money to buy her freedom. The vampire, Lucian, hadn't asked to meet her first, hadn't requested a photograph or a list of her qualities. The broker said he didn't care what she looked like, how educated she was, or whether she could cook. He needed a legal human spouse. She needed an exit. The transaction was clean, but sitting across from him now in the lawyer's office, Elena wondered what kind of man married a complete stranger. What kind of creature, she corrected herself. Vampire. The word still felt foreign on her tongue, despite 3 decades of vampires walking openly among humans, holding political office, running corporations, living in plain sight. Lucian wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Elena had earned in her entire life. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing a face that could have been 30 or 300. Sharp cheekbones. A mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile sometime during the last century. But it was his eyes that made Elena's breath catch. Not because they were red or inhuman, they were simply dark, almost black, and desperately, achingly tired. She recognized that exhaustion. She wore it too. The lawyer droned through the terms. Mrs. Elena Thorne would become Mrs. Elena Ashford. She would reside in Mr. Ashford's primary residence. She would be entitled to full financial support, medical care, and legal protection under vampire human marriage law. In exchange, she would fulfill the legal role of spouse for a minimum term of 1 year, after which either party could file for dissolution. No consummation required. No affection expected. A business arrangement wrapped in wedding bands. Do you understand these terms? The lawyer peered at her over his spectacles. Elena nodded. She understood she was trading one cage for another. But this cage came with a salary, 3 meals a day, and a man who looked too tired to raise his hand to anyone. Lucian hadn't looked at her once during the entire proceeding. He stared at the wall behind the lawyer's head, his expression as blank as fresh snow. When the lawyer pronounced them legally bound, Lucian finally turned to her. "We should go." His voice was quiet, cultured, with an accent Elena couldn't place. British, maybe, or something older. He stood, and Elena realized how tall he was. At least 6'3", with the kind of presence that made people step aside in doorways. But he moved carefully around her, keeping distance, as if afraid she might bolt. Smart man. She'd considered it 3 times already. The car waiting outside was not what Elena expected. She'd pictured something gothic and dramatic. Maybe a vintage hearse, or a limousine with tinted windows. Instead, Lucian opened the door to a modest black sedan, the kind a doctor or lawyer might drive. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed wealth or power or vampire. He didn't try to help her into the car. Didn't touch her at all. Just waited until she was settled before closing the door with careful precision and walking around to the driver's side. They drove through the city in silence. Elena watched the neighborhoods change outside her window. The factory district where she'd spent her nights breathing cotton dust. The cramped apartments where families stacked on top of each other like cordwood. Then gradually, imperceptibly, the buildings grew farther apart. Trees appeared. Actual trees, not the struggling saplings the city planted in concrete squares, but old-growth oaks with branches that created tunnels of green overhead. The houses became estates. Then the estates became invisible behind walls and gates. Lucian turned down a private road. Elena's stomach tightened. She'd made a terrible mistake. She'd signed her life away to a stranger based on nothing but desperation and a lawyer's promises. What if he was worse than her stepfather? What if the basement room he had planned for her had no windows at all? But when the house came into view, Elena's breath caught for an entirely different reason. It wasn't a mansion. It was barely larger than a normal home. Just 2 stories of warm gray stone covered in climbing roses. Windows glowed with soft light against the gathering dusk. A garden wrapped around the sides, wild and slightly overgrown, as if someone had planted it with love then forgotten to maintain it. It looked like a place where someone might actually live, not just exist. Lucian parked and sat for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel. Then, so quietly Elena almost missed it, he said, "I won't hurt you." She turned to look at him. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white against the dark leather of the steering wheel. "I know you're afraid. I know you don't know me. But I won't hurt you. You have my word, for whatever that's worth to you." Something in Elena's chest loosened, just slightly. A man who knew she was afraid, who acknowledged it instead of dismissing it, was already better than what she'd left behind. She managed a nod. Lucian exhaled and opened his door. Elena followed him up the stone path to the front door. He unlocked it, then stepped aside, letting her enter first. The interior was warm. That was Elena's first thought, warm and lived in, with books stacked on tables and a sweater thrown over a chair. The furniture was old but well made, the kind that lasted generations. Paintings covered the walls, not expensive art but watercolors of landscapes and seascapes, as if someone had traveled extensively and wanted to remember. "Your room is upstairs," Lucian said, moving past her toward the staircase. "First door on the left, there's a lock on the inside." He paused, his back to her. "Only on the inside." Elena climbed the stairs slowly, testing each step as if it might disappear beneath her feet. The door he'd indicated was ajar. She pushed it open and stopped. The room was larger than the entire basement she'd lived in for 5 years. A real bed with a thick duvet. A window seat overlooking the garden. A desk. A bookshelf. A closet. A door that led to a private bathroom with a tub deep enough to drown in. And on the bedside table, a small vase with fresh flowers. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands against her face. She would not cry. She had not cried when her stepfather locked her in the dark for 3 days. She had not cried when her mother died and left her alone with monsters. She would not cry now because a stranger had given her a room with flowers and a lock that only worked from the inside. But her shoulders shook anyway, and the tears came hot and fast. And somewhere downstairs she heard Lucian moving around, giving her privacy, giving her space, giving her the first moment of safety she'd felt in longer than she could remember. When the tears finally stopped, Elena washed her face in the bathroom sink and studied herself in the mirror. Same brown eyes, same sharp chin, same dark hair she kept short because long hair gave people something to grab. Same girl, different cage. Except this cage had flowers, and a vampire who said he wouldn't hurt her. It wasn't much. But it was more than she'd had this morning. Elena woke to silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of her stepfather's basement, but the gentle quiet of a house at peace with itself. Morning light filtered through curtains she didn't remember closing. For a moment she lay perfectly still, cataloging her surroundings the way prey animals check for predators. Soft mattress. Clean sheets. No sound of footsteps overhead. No shouting. No doors slamming. The flowers on the bedside table had been replaced with fresh ones. She'd fallen asleep in her clothes from yesterday, too exhausted to change, too afraid to fully undress in a stranger's house. But someone had draped a blanket over her anyway. Someone had left a glass of water on the nightstand. Someone had closed the curtains so the morning sun wouldn't wake her too early. Elena sat up slowly, her body aching in ways that had nothing to do with the comfortable bed. She'd worked a double shift at the factory before the wedding, knowing they wouldn't hold her position, knowing she was burning a bridge she might desperately need if this marriage proved to be another nightmare. Her hands still smelled like machine oil and cotton fiber. She found a note on the desk, written in careful, old-fashioned script. "Good morning. Please help yourself to anything in the kitchen. I'll be in my study if you need me. The bathroom has toiletries, and there are clothes in the closet that should fit. Take your time. Lucian." Elena read it 3 times, searching for hidden meanings or coded threats, but the words remained simple, almost painfully polite. She showered in water so hot it turned her skin pink, using soap that smelled like lavender instead of the industrial bar she'd shared with her stepsisters. The clothes in the closet were plain but well made. Jeans that actually fit her waist. Soft cotton shirts. A sweater for when the house got cold. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed vampire wealth, but everything clean and whole and hers. She dressed slowly, armor for facing her new reality. Downstairs, the kitchen was exactly what Elena expected from a house that looked loved but slightly neglected. Copper pots hung from a rack that needed polishing. Herbs grew in pots on the windowsill, some thriving, others dying from irregular watering. The refrigerator hummed softly, and when Elena opened it, she found it stocked with actual food. Fresh vegetables, fruit, cheese, bread from a bakery, not the discount store. There was also blood, stored in medical bags on the bottom shelf with the same casual practicality as someone else might store milk. Elena made herself toast and tea, her hands remembering the ritual of breakfast even as her mind struggled to accept that no one was going to burst in and tell her she hadn't earned it yet. She sat at the small kitchen table, watching dust motes dance in the morning light, and felt the strange weight of nothing happening. No crisis. No anger. No fear. Just quiet. Just breakfast. Just a moment of peace so foreign it felt dangerous. She was washing her plate when Lucian appeared in the doorway. He moved so silently she didn't hear him until he spoke. "Did you sleep well?" Elena jumped, water sloshing over the sink edge. Her heart hammered, instinct screaming at her to apologize, to explain, to make herself small, but Lucian had already stepped back, hands raised slightly in a gesture of harmlessness. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to startle you. I should have made more noise." In daylight, he looked somehow more human and less so. The exhaustion was clearer in his face, carved into lines around his eyes and mouth, but there was also something gentle in the way he held himself, a deliberate softness in his movements, as if he was very aware of how much space he took up and tried to minimize it. Elena forced her breathing to steady. "It's fine. I'm just not used to being in the morning." She stopped herself. He didn't need to know what she was, or wasn't used to. Lucian nodded slowly, as if she'd said more than she had. He moved to the coffee maker, giving her space, keeping the kitchen island between them. "I usually work in my study during the day. You're welcome to explore the house, the garden, anywhere you like. There's a library in the East Wing if you enjoy reading. The television works, though I admit I have no idea what's on it these days." Elena watched him prepare coffee with the precise movements of someone following a routine centuries old. What do you do? In your study? He glanced at her, surprised by the question. I'm an architect. I design buildings, historical preservation mostly, helping old structures adapt to new uses without losing their character. It seemed impossibly normal for a vampire. Elena had imagined vampires doing vampire things, whatever those were, running nightclubs or ancient conspiracies or something dramatic. Not architecture, not paperwork and blueprints and planning meetings. You seem surprised, Lucian observed, a ghost of amusement in his voice. I am, Elena admitted. It's normal. Lucian's expression shifted, something almost sad crossing his features. Most of us are, he said quietly. Normal. We just live a very long time while being normal. It's actually quite tedious. He poured his coffee and leaned against the counter, careful to maintain the distance between them. I know you have questions. About me, about this arrangement, about why I needed to marry a human stranger. You're entitled to answers, but I don't want to overwhelm you on your first morning here. We have time. Time. Elena had never had time before. Everything in her life had been urgent, crisis-driven, survival-focused. The concept of time stretching out ahead of her, undemanding and patient, felt like standing at the edge of an ocean when you'd only ever known puddles. Can I ask one question? Elena said. Of course. Why didn't you want to meet me first? Before the wedding. Most people would want to at least see what they were getting. Lucian was quiet for a long moment, studying his coffee as if it held answers. Because, he said finally, if I'd met you, I would have seen that you were afraid, and I would have felt guilty for being part of a transaction that kept you afraid. This way, the choice was entirely yours. Clean paperwork. No obligation beyond what you'd already decided. He looked up at her then, and Elena saw something raw in his expression. I needed a human wife for legal reasons, yes, but I didn't need you to pretend to be happy about it. I didn't need you to perform gratitude or affection or anything else. I just needed your signature. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. It was perhaps the most honest thing anyone had ever said to Elena. He wasn't pretending this was romance. Wasn't dressing up the transaction in flowers and sweet words. He'd married her for legal reasons. She'd married him for survival. They were two people using each other, but at least they were honest about it. I can work with that, Elena said. Lucian's shoulders dropped slightly, tension she hadn't noticed releasing. Good, he said. Then he picked up his coffee and started toward the door. He paused in the threshold. Elena? She looked up. You're not a prisoner here. You can leave any time. Walk to town, visit friends, whatever you need. I'm not trying to trap you. Just so we're clear. He left before she could respond. Elena stood in the kitchen, processing. He'd just told her she could leave. What kind of captor told their captive they were free to go? Unless he was playing a longer game. Unless this was part of the trap, making her feel safe so she'd let her guard down. But looking around the kitchen with its dying herbs and mismatched mugs, Elena couldn't quite make herself believe in a grand conspiracy. This felt less like a carefully laid trap, and more like a lonely man who'd made a practical decision and now had to live with another person in his space. Elena spent the rest of that first day exploring the house like a ghost haunting her own future. Each room revealed more contradictions. The formal dining room looked unused, dust gathering on the chandelier, but someone had left a book on the table, spine cracked from repeated readings. The living room had expensive furniture arranged stiffly, but a worn armchair by the window faced the garden, a reading lamp positioned just right. A blanket draped over the arm. This was a house decorated by someone trying to look like they lived properly, while actually living in small, comfortable corners. The library stopped Elena in her tracks. An entire room lined floor to ceiling with books. The kind of collection that took lifetimes to build. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles in languages she recognized and many she didn't. Architecture texts, obviously, thick volumes on Gothic cathedrals and Roman aqueducts. But also poetry, philosophy, novels both classic and contemporary. Someone had read these books, made notes in margins, left bookmarks in unfinished pages. A person lived here, not just a vampire. She found Lucian's study by accident, the door ajar enough to see inside. He sat at a large drafting table, bent over blueprints, completely absorbed. For a moment, Elena just watched him work. His hand moved with confidence across the paper, sketching additions to what looked like an old church. There was something almost meditative in his focus, as if this was where he felt most himself. She started to leave, not wanting to interrupt, but a floorboard creaked beneath her foot. Lucian looked up, and Elena expected annoyance at the interruption. Instead, he just looked startled to remember he wasn't alone. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you," Elena said quickly. "You're not," Lucian replied, setting down his pencil. "I lose track of time when I'm working. It's easy to forget the world exists." He gestured to the blueprints. "This is a church in the old quarter. Built in 1734, been abandoned for 20 years. The city wants to turn it into a community center but preserve the original architecture. It's like a puzzle, figuring out how to honor the past while serving the present." Elena moved closer, drawn by the precision of his work. The drawings were beautiful, technical yet artistic, showing how modern amenities could hide inside historic walls. "How do you know what the original builders intended?" she asked. "Research, mostly," Lucian said. "Old records, photographs, similar buildings from the same period, but sometimes you just have to feel it. Every building has a personality, a way it wants to be used. You have to listen." It was such an unexpected answer from someone who seemed so controlled, so careful. Elena studied him, this stranger she'd married, and realized she'd made assumptions based on nothing but fear. "He's careful with old buildings." A voice in her head whispered, "Maybe he's careful with people too." They fell into an easy silence, Elena looking at the blueprints while Lucian returned to his sketching. After a while she asked, "Why did you need a human wife?" "For legal reasons, you said." "But what legal reasons?" Lucian paused, considering how much to share. "Vampire property law is complicated," he said finally. "When we live for centuries, inheritance becomes tangled. My family estate, this house, the land, it's all been in vampire hands for 8 generations, but the city has new rules about long-term vampire property ownership. They're worried about vampires accumulating too much wealth, too much power. So now, to maintain certain property rights, you need a human family member, a spouse, preferably. It keeps the property in circulation theoretically." He set down his pencil and turned to face her fully. "I could have fought it legally, but that would have taken years and drawn attention. This was simpler. Marry a human, maintain my property rights. Everyone's satisfied." "Except you married a complete stranger," Elena pointed out. "That seems neither simple nor safe." Lucian's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "No," he agreed, "it wasn't safe at all. But I'm very tired of fighting. Sometimes the path of least resistance is the only path you have energy for." Elena understood that bone deep. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. "In this house, about 150 years, Lucian said. "In this city, nearly 300. Before that, elsewhere. I've lost track of all the elsewheres." 300 years. Elena's mind struggled with the concept. He'd been alive before her country existed in its current form. He'd watched the world transform countless times while staying fundamentally himself. "How do you not go insane?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Who says I haven't?" Lucian replied, but there was dark humor in his voice. "Sanity is relative when you've lived as long as I have. You learn to find small things that matter. Projects. Puzzles. Reasons to care about tomorrow." His gaze drifted to the window overlooking the garden. "I plant roses," he said quietly. "Every decade or so a new variety. I'll never see them reach their full maturity, but someone will. That's enough." Elena felt something shift in her understanding of this man. He wasn't a monster in a mansion. He was just someone trying to find meaning in an existence that stretched too long. Someone who cared about roses he'd never see bloom, and churches he'd never worship in, and blueprints for buildings that would outlast even him. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "A monster," Elena admitted. "Someone cruel, or controlling, or dangerous. Someone who would hurt me." Lucian met her eyes, and the sadness in his face aged him centuries. "I've been alive for over 300 years, Elena. I've seen enough cruelty to last several lifetimes. The last thing I want is to add more to the world." He turned back to his blueprints. "You're safe here. I know you don't believe that yet, but you will. Take whatever time you need." Elena left him to his work and wandered down to the garden. It was wilder than she'd thought from the window, roses climbing over trellises in an explosion of reds and pinks and whites. Some were clearly old, thick canes twisted with age. Others were younger, just establishing themselves, all of them slightly overgrown, as if the gardener loved them but couldn't keep up with their enthusiasm for living. She found a stone bench hidden among the roses and sat, breathing in the heavy perfume. The sun was warm on her face. Birds sang in the trees. Somewhere nearby, a fountain trickled water over stone. It was so peaceful it hurt. Elena pulled her knees to her chest and let herself feel it. This strange new reality. No one knew where she was. Her stepfather had his money and good riddance to the burden he'd finally sold off. Her stepsisters had never cared enough to miss her. The factory had already filled her position. She was a ghost, disappeared from her old life, haunting this new one. And for the first time she could remember, that felt like freedom, rather than loss. The first week passed in a strange suspended reality. Elena woke each morning to fresh flowers. She made her own breakfast while Lucian worked in his study. They passed each other like roommates, polite and distant. Two people sharing space, without truly sharing lives. But Elena was watching. She couldn't help it, couldn't turn off the survival instinct that had kept her alive this long. She watched how Lucian moved through his own house, careful and contained, as if he didn't want to take up too much space. She watched how he ate, when he ate, which was rarely. Mostly he drank blood from those medical bags, practical and clinical, the way someone else might drink a protein shake. No drama, no fangs at throats, just maintenance. She watched how he worked, losing himself in blueprints and building plans for hours, emerging only when hunger or exhaustion forced him up. And she watched how he never, not once, came upstairs while she was in her room. Never knocked on her door. Never asked what she did with her days. He'd meant what he said about not being a prison. On the 8th day, Elena discovered the garden shed. She'd been exploring the grounds, testing the boundaries of her new territory, when she found it half hidden behind a wall of climbing roses. Inside, garden tools hung neatly on walls, but everything was covered in dust. It looked like someone had organized this space with care, then abandoned it. The sight made something ache in Elena's chest. She knew about things carefully built then left behind. That afternoon she asked Lucian for permission to work in the garden. He looked up from his drafting table, surprised. "You don't need my permission," he said. "This is your home now, too. But yes, please." "I've let it go terribly. I keep meaning to hire someone," but he trailed off. Elena understood. Sometimes the gap between intention and action was just too wide to cross alone. She spent the rest of the day in the garden, pruning overgrown roses, pulling weeds from the flower beds, clearing dead growth to make room for new. Her hands remembered this work from childhood, from before her mother died, when they'd had a small garden behind their cottage. When things had been different, Lucian appeared in the doorway as the sun started to set. He stood there for a long moment, just watching her work. When Elena finally noticed him, he looked almost stricken. "My wife planted these roses," he said quietly. "The older ones. She loved gardens." Elena's hands stilled on the pruning shears. I didn't know you'd been married before. I'm sorry. Don't be, Lucian said, moving into the garden slowly, as if approaching something fragile. It was a long time ago. 200 years, but I've never been able to bring myself to tear out her roses even when they grew wild. It felt like erasing her. Elena looked at the garden with new eyes, seeing it not as neglect but as a memorial. Someone had loved these plants. Someone had chosen each variety, planned the colors, imagined how they'd look in bloom. And someone else had kept them alive long past, when it hurt to do so. You don't have to, you know. Lucian continued. Take care of them. I don't want you to feel obligated. I want to, Elena said, and realized it was true. There's something honest about gardens. They don't pretend, they're just alive and trying, and sometimes they need help. She met his eyes. I understand that. Lucian studied her face for a moment, really looked at her for the first time since they'd met. When he spoke, his voice was soft. You've been taking care of things that needed help for a long time, haven't you? Elena didn't answer, but she didn't need to. That night, Lucian knocked on her door for the first time. Elena's heart leaped into her throat, instinct screaming danger. But when she opened it, he stood well back in the hallway, hands visible, posture open. I wanted to ask, he said carefully. Tomorrow I have a meeting with the City Planning Commission. About the church project. It's downtown, several hours. I wanted you to know I'd be gone, in case you wondered where I was. You don't have to tell me your schedule, Elena said. Yes, I do, Lucian replied. You're living with a stranger. You have a right to know when that stranger won't be in the house. It's about safety. Yours. The consideration in that simple act made Elena's throat tight. He was thinking about how she'd feel, alone in the house, not knowing if he might return unexpectedly, giving her information so she could relax, giving her control in whatever small ways he could. Thank you, she managed. I'll be back before dark, Lucian added. But if I'm not, my cell number is on the refrigerator. And Elena? She looked up. You don't have to stay in your room. This house is as much yours as mine now. Use it. Live in it. Be comfortable. He left before she could respond, disappearing down the hallway like a shadow. Elena stood in her doorway for a long time, processing. A man who asked permission, who gave information freely, who made space for her fear without judgment. Who was this vampire she'd married? The next day, alone in the house, Elena did something terrifying. She went into the living room, the formal one that looked unused, and she sat in the big armchair by the window, the one that was clearly Lucian's, worn to his shape, positioned just right for reading. She half expected alarms to sound or for lightning to strike her for daring to touch his things. But nothing happened. Just silence, and sunlight, and the comfortable embrace of a chair that had cradled someone through long evenings. She picked up the book on the side table. Poetry. Neruda. The margins were filled with notes in Lucian's careful script, thoughts and reactions and underlined passages. She read, I love you without knowing how, or when or from where. I love you straightforwardly, without complexities or pride. So I love you because I know no other way. Someone had drawn a small star next to that verse. Someone had returned to it enough times to wear the page soft. Elena set the book down carefully and looked around the room with new understanding. This wasn't a museum of someone trying to live properly. This was the home of someone who'd forgotten how to share space with another person. Someone who'd been alone so long they'd built walls inside their own house, living in corners because the whole space felt too big, too empty, too full of ghosts. When Lucian returned that evening, he found Elena in the kitchen making dinner. Real dinner, not just toast or simple things. She'd found a cookbook and ingredients and decided to push against the edges of her fear. He stopped in the doorway, surprise clear on his face. You don't have to cook, he said. I wanted to, Elena replied, Stirring sauce. You fed me for over a week. Seemed fair to return the favor. I don't really eat, Lucian started. Food, yes, but I don't need I know, Alana interrupted. But you can eat food, right? It won't hurt you? No, Lucian admitted. I just don't usually bother. Then humor me, Elena said. Consider it payment for the garden. They ate at the kitchen table. An odd little meal where Elena had real food and Lucian moved pasta around his plate politely while clearly not needing it. But he ate some anyway. And he complimented her cooking. And they talked about his meeting and her day in the garden. And for just a moment, it almost felt normal. Like two people learning to live in the same space. Not a vampire and his contractual human wife. Just people. Lonely people, maybe. Careful people. Definitely. But people trying. 3 weeks into the marriage, Elena started receiving mail. Not forwarded from her old address. Nothing from her past life. New mail. Addressed to Mrs. Elena Ashford. The name still looked foreign written out. Like someone else's identity she was borrowing. The first letter was from the local library, welcoming her to the neighborhood and offering a free membership. The second was an invitation to a community garden meeting. The third was from a small art gallery downtown, announcing their new exhibition. How did they know I was here? Elena asked Lucian over their now regular evening meals. He glanced at the mail she'd set on the table. I registered our marriage with the city, he said. Public record. These are probably automated mailings to new residents in the district. He paused, studying her face. Does it bother you? People knowing where you are? Elena considered the question honestly. Her first instinct was yes, panic. Anyone who knew where she was could find her. But her stepfather had his money and no reason to come looking for his burden. Her stepsisters had their comfortable lives and no interest in the sister they'd never wanted. No one from her old life cared enough to track her down. Actually, she said slowly, it feels like becoming real. Like I exist somewhere officially. Like I'm not just hiding. You're not hiding, Lucian said firmly. You're living. There's a difference. That weekend, Elena took the bus downtown. Lucian had offered to drive her, but she needed to do this alone. Needed to prove to herself that she could leave the house and come back. That this wasn't just a prettier cage. The city looked different from the bus window than it had from behind factory walls. She'd lived here for years, but always in the margins, moving through shadows between work and home. Invisible. Now she watched neighborhoods unfold like pages in a book, each with its own character, its own story. The art gallery was small, tucked between a coffee shop and a bookstore, in what the invitation called the Arts District. Elena had never been to an art gallery before, couldn't afford it, wouldn't have thought herself welcome, wouldn't have believed art was for people like her. But the door was open, and the entry was free, and no one stopped her from walking in. The exhibition was landscape paintings by a local artist, scenes from around the city, but transformed by light and color into something almost magical. The factory district at sunset turned golden. The old port at dawn, wrapped in mist. The wealthy neighborhoods made somehow lonely and stark. Elena stood in front of a painting of the arts district itself, this very street at dusk, and felt something unlock in her chest. Someone had looked at the world she moved through and seen beauty. Had deemed it worth capturing, worth sharing, worth the time and care it took to translate reality into art. Excuse me, a voice said behind her. Elena turned to find an older woman, paint-stained smock suggesting she was the artist. I saw you looking at that piece. It's one of my favorites. Elena struggled for something intelligent to say. You made the ordinary look extraordinary. The woman smiled. That's the whole point of art, isn't it? Reminding people that extraordinary is already there. They've just stopped seeing it. She extended a hand. Margaret Chen, I'm the artist. And apparently I can't leave my own opening to just let people enjoy the work. Elena shook her hand. Elena Ashford, I just moved to the neighborhood. "You're Lucian's new wife," Margaret said, recognition lighting her face. "He mentioned he'd gotten married. I've known Lucian for 40 years now. He designed the community center where I teach art classes." She smiled warmly. "Welcome to the neighborhood. It's good for him to have someone around again. He's been alone too long." Elena didn't know how to respond to that. The easy familiarity, the assumption of belonging, the casual mention of knowing a vampire for 4 decades. This was a world where vampires had neighbors and friendships and regular lives, where they weren't just monsters in stories but people you'd known for 40 years. They talked for a while, Margaret sharing stories about the neighborhood, about the community, about Lucian. "He's one of the good ones," she said at one point. "Private, keeps to himself, but his heart's in the right place. When that developer tried to bulldoze the historic district 5 years ago, Lucian's the one who organized the resistance. Saved half the old buildings in this area." Elena filed that information away. Another piece of the puzzle that was her strange vampire husband. When she returned home that evening, Lucian was in the garden. He'd started helping her with the heavier work, moving stones and repairing trellises. They worked in comfortable silence mostly, but it was a different kind of silence than those first days. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. "I met Margaret Chen today," Elena said, kneeling beside a flower bed. At her art exhibition. Lucian looked up, genuine pleasure crossing his face. "Did you? She's wonderfully talented. I've been trying to get her to do a showing of her architectural studies, but she insists on her street scenes." He paused. "What did you think?" "I thought she made the ordinary extraordinary," Elena said. "And I thought it was brave, putting your work out there for people to judge. You should see what you're doing here." Lucian gestured at the garden. "This was dying. You brought it back to life. That's art too." "No one's going to put this in a gallery," Elena said. "Why not?" Lucian countered. "Beauty doesn't have to be in a gallery to matter. Some of the most meaningful art happens in places people don't think to look. In gardens, in the way someone arranges their home, in small acts of care that transform spaces." Elena studied him, this vampire who saw the world through an architect's eyes, finding structure and beauty in everything. "You see the world differently than most people, don't you?" "I've had 300 years to practice," Lucian said with a slight smile. "You start noticing patterns, how things fit together, how small changes ripple outward." He sat back on his heels, looking at the garden they'd restored together. "Like these roses. You pruned them 3 weeks ago. Now look at the new growth. Give it another month and this place will be completely different." But the change started with small, careful cuts. That's true for most things worth doing. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her comfortable bed in her safe room with her inside lock and felt restless for reasons she couldn't name. Finally, she got up and wandered downstairs. The house was dark except for one light. Lucian's study. She found him at his drafting table, working by lamplight even though his vampire eyes didn't need it. When she knocked softly on the doorframe, he looked up, concern immediate on his face. "Are you all right?" "Just couldn't sleep," Elena said. "Didn't mean to bother you." "You're not bothering me," Lucian replied. "I don't sleep much." One of the less pleasant aspects of vampirism. You get tired, but sleep is optional, and often elusive. He gestured to a chair near his desk. "Want company?" Elena settled into the chair, tucking her feet under her. They sat in comfortable quiet, Lucian sketching while she watched. After a while she asked, "What was she like? Your first wife?" Lucian's hand stilled on his pencil. Then he set it down and leaned back. "Sarah," he said softly. "She was practical and funny, and completely unimpressed by vampires. I met her in 1789. I was trying to buy her family's bakery for a development project, and she told me I could take my vampire money and choke on it." Lucian smiled at the memory, and Elena saw him transform. The careful distance dropped away. replaced by genuine warmth. She negotiated with me for 3 months. He continued. Every meeting, she'd bring fresh bread and eat it in front of me, describing the flavors in excruciating detail because she knew I couldn't really taste it anymore. Said if I was going to take her family's legacy, I should at least understand what I was destroying. Elena found herself smiling. Did you buy the bakery? No, Lucian said. I fell in love with her instead. Built my development around her bakery. Designed the whole district to flow around that one building like water around a stone. He paused, lost in the past. She agreed to marry me on the condition that I never try to turn her. She wanted a normal human lifespan. Said living forever sounded boring. And I loved her enough to watch her age. Elena tried to imagine it. Watching someone you loved grow old while you stayed unchanged. Choosing that pain willingly. That must have been hard. It was the best and worst 40 years of my life, Lucian said quietly. Every moment was precious, because I knew exactly how finite it was. And when she died, I thought I might die too. Didn't know if vampires could die of grief, but I was willing to test it. He looked at Elena then. Really looked at her. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. This marriage we have, it's not the same thing. You don't have to worry that I'm trying to replace her or recreate something that's gone. This is different. This is just two people trying to survive their circumstances with as much dignity as they can manage. I wasn't worried about that, Elena said, and realized it was true. She'd been worried about a lot of things, but never that Lucian might confuse her with a ghost. Why the roses, though? Why keep the garden? Letting go of her would feel like losing her twice, Lucian admitted. The roses are proof she existed. That we existed. That something beautiful happened here once. He turned back to his blueprints, but his voice was soft. I know it's probably unhealthy. Margaret tells me so every few years. But I'd rather keep the garden than forget what it was like to be that happy. Elena understood that too. The desperate need to hold on to proof that better things were possible. She found herself telling him about her mother, about the small garden they'd had, about how her mother died when Elena was 13, and her stepfather sold the cottage within a month. I never got to say goodbye to the garden, Elena said. By the time I understood we were moving, it was already gone. Someone had paved it over for a parking space. She looked up at Lucian. Maybe that's why I wanted to help with this one. It felt like getting a second chance at something I'd lost. They talked until dawn, sharing stories of the people they'd loved and lost, the homes they'd left behind, the versions of themselves that no longer existed. By the time the sun rose, something had shifted between them. Not romance, but something equally valuable. Recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to keep gardens growing in memory of ghosts. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Elena worked in the garden and explored the neighborhood. Lucian designed buildings and slowly taught her about architecture, pointing out details she'd never noticed. The way a doorway framed a view, how windows could manipulate light, the conversation between old structures and new additions. He took her to see the church he was restoring. She stood in the nave while he explained how he'd preserved the original stained glass while adding modern climate control. His passion for the work was evident in every gesture, every careful explanation. This building has been here for nearly 300 years, he said, running his hand along a stone column. It's survived wars and floods and changing times. My job is to make sure it survives 300 more while still being useful to the people who need it now. You love old things, Elena observed. I love things that endure, Lucian corrected. Things that prove lasting as possible. Everything in my life has been temporary except the buildings. They outlast me. There's comfort in that. One evening, Margaret invited them both to dinner. Elena felt nervous walking up to the artist's brownstone, worried about being out in public as Lucian's wife. Worried people would have expectations she couldn't meet. But Margaret welcomed them warmly, and her husband Tom was a gentle man who made terrible jokes and clearly adored his wife. Over wine and pasta, they told stories about the neighborhood, about when vampires first came out of hiding 50 years ago, about the awkward integration period, the fear and fascination, the slowly building trust. Lucian helped with that, Tom said. Half the vampires in this district, Lucian vouched for them with the neighborhood association, proved they were just people trying to live their lives. Margaret patted Lucian's hand. He forgets to mention he also organized the humans, made sure no one got pushed out when vampire money started flowing in, built subsidized housing, protected rent controls, made sure the community could stay diverse. Elena looked at her husband with new eyes. You did all that? Someone had to, Lucian said uncomfortably. I'd lived here long enough to care about who my neighbors were. On the walk home, Elena asked, why don't you talk about the things you've done? The good things? Because they weren't acts of charity, Lucian said. They were selfish. I wanted a neighborhood where I could live peacefully, where humans and vampires could coexist without constant tension. Every building I saved, every policy I fought for, it was for my own benefit. Making the world more livable for everyone makes it more livable for you, Elena pointed out. That's not selfish, that's just intelligent kindness. Lucian stopped walking, surprise clear on his face. I never thought of it that way. Elena smiled. You love things that endure, right? Communities endure. Neighborhoods endure. You were building something meant to last. Of course you care about it. Something in Lucian's expression shifted. He looked at Elena like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. You're very wise, he said softly. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. I've just had a lot of practice surviving, Elena replied. You learn to see what actually matters. That night, Elena lay in bed thinking about survival versus living. For years she'd been in survival mode. Every decision filtered through the question of whether it would keep her safe, keep her fed, keep her hidden from her stepfather's anger. But here, in this house with its garden and its ghost roses, and its lonely vampire who built communities while thinking he was being selfish, she was starting to live. Starting to make choices based on what she wanted rather than what would hurt least. The next morning she found Lucian in the kitchen earlier than usual. He looked nervous, a stack of papers on the table in front of him. Elena? I need to ask you something. She poured coffee, wary. Okay. I have a gala next month, Lucian said, for the Historical Preservation Society. I'm receiving an award for the church restoration. It's a public event, fairly high profile. He looked uncomfortable. I know we agreed this marriage was private, but people will expect to see my wife there. If you're not comfortable, I can make excuses, but I wanted to ask. Elena processed this. A public appearance as Mrs. Ashford, being seen, being acknowledged, standing beside him in front of people who mattered. Part of her wanted to refuse, to hide, but a larger part, the part that was learning to live instead of just survive, felt something different. When is it? She asked. 3 weeks from Saturday, Lucian replied. Formal dress. About 3 hours. I'd stay beside you the entire time. We can leave whenever you want. Elena thought about Margaret's art show, about walking through the neighborhood as herself, about how every time she'd pushed past fear, she'd found something worth having on the other side. Okay, she said. I'll go. Lucian's face transformed with relief. Thank you. I'll make sure you have everything you need. A dress, transportation, whatever makes you comfortable. Elena nodded, then realized something. Lucian? Yes? I don't know how to act at a fancy vampire gala. I've never been to anything like that. Neither has anyone else the first time, Lucian said gently. Just be yourself. That's all anyone can do. The dress arrived a week before the gala. Elena opened the box in her room and found deep emerald silk that moved like water. Simple, elegant, nothing overly dramatic. A note in Lucian's handwriting said, "Thought this color would suit you. If you hate it, we can find something else. No pressure." She tried it on, and for the first time in years, Elena looked in the mirror and saw someone who belonged in beautiful things. Not a servant. Not a burden. Just a woman who could wear emerald silk and carry it off. The morning of the gala, Elena woke to sounds from downstairs, raised voices, which was unusual enough to send alarm through her system. She crept to the top of the stairs and froze. Her stepfather stood in Lucian's foyer. "You can't keep her from her family," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying that edge Elena knew too well. The edge that came before violence. "She's my stepdaughter. I have rights." "You sold those rights," Lucian replied, and his voice was colder than Elena had ever heard it. "You took payment for a marriage contract. Elena is legally my wife now, and unless she wishes to see you, you have no claim to enter this house or her life." "I want to talk to her," Marcus demanded. "Make sure she's all right. Make sure some vampire isn't manipulating her." Elena felt ice in her veins. He'd come after weeks of peace, after she'd started to believe she was safe. He'd found her. Lucian's posture shifted. Elena recognized it from the few times she'd seen him truly angry. He seemed to grow taller, presence filling the space, and for the first time she understood he was apex predator wearing human courtesy. "You want to ensure her well-being?" Lucian said quietly. "Let me tell you about Elena's well-being, Marcus. She has nightmares about basements. She flinches at raised voices. She apologizes for taking up space. And every single one of those wounds came from your house, your care. So no, I don't think you're concerned about her well-being. I think you're concerned she might tell people what you are." Marcus's face flushed. "You don't know anything about our family. I know you locked a child in the dark," Lucian said, and something ancient and dangerous crept into his voice. "I know you sold your wife's daughter like property. I know Elena is safe here, which is more than she ever was with you. Now get out of my house before I forget I'm supposed to be civilized." Elena had never heard anyone defend her like that, never had someone stand between her and her stepfather's anger. She wanted to run downstairs to add her own voice, but fear kept her frozen. Marcus must have seen something in Lucian's face that convinced him. He left, slamming the door, his shouted threats fading as he stormed down the drive. Elena heard Lucian release a long breath. Then his voice, softer. "Elena, I know you're on the stairs. You can come down." She descended slowly, shame and gratitude warring in her chest. "I'm sorry. I didn't know he'd come here. I should have told you about him properly. You have nothing to apologize for," Lucian said firmly. He turned to face her, and his expression was carefully controlled. "Are you all right?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. She sat on the bottom stair, legs suddenly unsteady. "I thought I was free. I thought signing the contract meant he couldn't touch me anymore." "You are free," Lucian said. "And he can't touch you. Not legally, not physically. This house is warded. The property line has protections I set up decades ago. He can't come back without invitation." Elena looked up at him. "You protected me. Before you even knew if I'd want protecting." Lucian moved to sit on the stair beside her, careful to leave space between them. "When I agreed to marry a human stranger," he said quietly, "I knew there had to be a reason someone would take that deal. No one marries a vampire they don't know unless they're running from something worse. I didn't want to pry, didn't want to make you relive anything you weren't ready to share. But I made sure you'd be safe here, whatever you were running from." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you sooner. I can only protect you now." Something broke open in Elena's chest. She'd spent so long being strong, being careful, protecting herself because no one else would. Having someone else shoulder that weight, even partially, even temporarily, felt like being able to breathe fully for the first time in years. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucian nodded, then stood. "The gala is tonight. If you'd rather not go after this morning, I understand completely. I can make excuses." Elena thought about hiding, about letting fear make her decisions, about giving Marcus even one more moment of power over her life. "No," she said, standing. "I want to go. I want to walk into that room as Elena Ashford and show everyone that I belong there. Show myself that I belong anywhere." Lucian smiled, and it reached his eyes. "Then let's show them exactly who you are." That evening, Elena descended the stairs in her emerald dress. Lucian waited in the foyer in a formal black suit, and when he saw her, he went very still. "You're beautiful," he said simply. Not the automatic compliment of a husband, but the genuine observation of someone seeing her clearly. Elena felt her cheeks warm. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The gala was held in a restored mansion in the historic district. Of course, Lucian had designed the restoration. As they entered, Elena felt eyes turn their way. Whispers followed them. The normally reclusive Lucian Ashford with a wife. No one had expected it. But Lucian kept his hand lightly at her back, a steadying presence, and introduced her to people with quiet pride. "This is my wife, Elena." Over and over, Elena heard herself introduced that way. Not just as an accessory, not as that human he married, but as his wife, with her name with respect. She met city planners and architects, artists and historians, vampires and humans mixing easily in formal wear and polite conversation. Margaret was there, beaming at them both. "You both look wonderful," she said, pulling Elena aside while Lucian was cornered by the mayor. "How are you holding up?" "Terrified," Elena admitted. "But also okay? I didn't know I could do this." Margaret squeezed her hand. Lucian chose well. Not everyone could match his particular brand of quiet strength. When they announced Lucian's award, Elena stood with the crowd to applaud, watched him accept with humble grace, deflecting praise to his team, thanking the community for trusting him with their history. And when he looked out at the crowd, his eyes found hers, and something in his expression said this matters more. "Because you're here." During dinner, seated at a table with other architects and their spouses, Elena found herself drawn into conversation about the neighborhood, about the church restoration, about what made a building worth saving. She realized she had opinions, knowledge gained from weeks of Lucian explaining his work, from walking the historic district with new eyes. A woman across the table, another architect's wife, leaned in. "How do you handle it, being married to someone so dedicated to his work?" Elena considered the question. "I think Lucian's work is important," she said slowly. "He's not just designing buildings. He's preserving history and creating spaces where communities can thrive. Why would I want him to be less dedicated to that?" The woman smiled. "You really love him." Elena opened her mouth to correct her, to explain this was a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience. But the words stuck, because somewhere in the past weeks, in gardens and kitchens and late-night conversations, something had shifted. She might not love Lucian the way romance novels described, but she loved his gentle care with old buildings, his patient teaching, the way he defended her to her stepfather, the roses he couldn't let die. She loved the life they were building in the spaces between. After the gala, everything felt different. Elena had stood beside Lucian in public, met his world, been accepted as his wife not just on paper, but in reality. When they returned home that night, neither of them went immediately to bed. Instead, they ended up in the kitchen, like they had so many evenings. Elena making tea while Lucian leaned against the counter. "You were remarkable tonight," he said. "Completely natural, like you'd been attending galas your whole life." Elena laughed. I was pretending the entire time. Isn't everyone? Lucian replied with a slight smile. The trick to formal events is realizing everyone else is just as uncomfortable. They're all pretending too. She handed him tea he didn't need but always accepted. Thank you for defending me this morning. Against Marcus. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Lucian said firmly. You're my wife. That means something to me. Even if this marriage started as a transaction, it means you're under my protection. It means I won't let anyone hurt you, including people from your past. He paused. I should have asked this weeks ago. But do you feel safe here? With me? Elena met his dark eyes and answered honestly. Yes. More than I've ever felt anywhere. Lucian's shoulders dropped slightly, tension releasing. Good. That's good. They stood in comfortable silence, sipping tea, until Elena asked the question that had been building all evening. Lucian, what happens after the year? The contract said either party could file for dissolution after 12 months. We're almost at 6 now. What happens then? Lucian set down his tea carefully. That depends on what you want. If you want your freedom, a divorce, a settlement that sets you up independently, I'll arrange all of it. No questions, no judgment. You'll walk away with enough money to start whatever life you choose. And if I don't want that? Elena asked quietly. Then we continue as we are, Lucian said. Or we renegotiate. Make this marriage real instead of contractual. Whatever you're comfortable with. He looked at her steadily. Elena, I won't trap you. This only works if you want to be here. I need you to know you have choices. Elena nodded slowly. 6 more months to decide the rest of her life. To figure out if this careful peace they'd built could become something lasting. The next morning, Margaret appeared at the door with coffee and knowing smile. Thought you might want company, she said, settling into the kitchen. That was quite the debut last night. Everyone's talking about Lucian's mysterious wife. Elena poured coffee, grateful for Margaret's easy warmth. Is that good or bad? Depends on your perspective, Margaret said. The gossips are disappointed you're not more scandalous. The romantics are thrilled that Lucian finally has someone. And those of us who actually know him are just happy he's not alone in this big house anymore. She studied Elena over her coffee mug. How are you really doing? Honestly, Elena said. I don't know. A month ago, I was nobody. Now I'm Mrs. Ashford, attending galas, being introduced to the mayor. It's surreal. You were never nobody. Margaret said firmly. You were just somewhere that didn't see you properly. Lucian sees you. That's why this works. Over the next weeks, Elena threw herself into making the house feel like home. Not Lucian's house where she was a guest, but their house, shared space. She reorganized the kitchen, hung art in the empty hallways, brought fresh flowers inside, not just for her room but for every surface. Lucian noticed immediately. You're nesting, he observed one evening, looking around at the transformed living room. Elena paused, worried she'd overstepped. Is that okay? It's wonderful, Lucian said, his voice thick. This house has been a museum for decades. Just me and my memories and dust. You're making it alive again. He touched a vase of fresh flowers on the mantel. Thank you. They started cooking together. Or rather, Elena cooked while Lucian kept her company, occasionally helping with tasks that didn't require actual tasting. They developed routines. Morning coffee, evening meals, weekends in the garden, small domestic rituals that felt more intimate than romance. One Saturday, Elena found old photo albums in the library. She brought them to Lucian hesitantly. Is it okay if I look at these? Of course, Lucian said, then hesitated. Though I should warn you, I'm not in most of them. Photographs and vampires don't always agree. We show up, but often strangely. But Sarah's in there. My first wife, if you'd rather not look. I'd like to, Elena said, if that's okay. They spent the afternoon going through albums together, Lucian telling stories about people and places long gone. Sarah was there, captured in old photographs, a woman with laugh lines and capable hands. She looked happy, surrounded by bread and light. She was beautiful, Elena said. She was everything, Lucian agreed quietly, and she taught me that loving someone fully means accepting their mortality, accepting that you'll lose them, and choosing to love them anyway. He looked at Elena. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand. If we make this marriage real, if we choose to build something beyond the contract, I'm choosing to care about someone human again, knowing I'll outlive you. And I'm willing to do that, if you are. Elena's heart raced. Are you saying? I'm saying, I care about you, Lucian interrupted gently. Not the way I loved Sarah. This is different, but I care about your happiness, your safety, your opinion on my building designs, the way you bring life back to dead gardens. You've made me remember what it's like to share space with someone, and I don't want to give that up. Elena didn't know what to say. She'd come into this marriage expecting survival. She'd found something much more complicated. I care about you too, she admitted. You make me feel safe and seen, and like I matter. But you're not sure if that's enough, Lucian finished. I understand. Take whatever time you need. The contract doesn't expire for months. No pressure, but Elena realized she didn't want to wait, didn't want to spend months wondering. She'd spent her whole life being careful, weighing every decision against potential danger. Maybe it was time to choose based on what she wanted instead of what she feared. What if I am sure? She asked. Lucian looked at her carefully. Are you? I know I don't want to leave, Elena said. I know this house feels like home. I know I trust you more than I've trusted anyone. I know that when I think about the future, you're in it. She took a breath. I know I want to make this marriage real, not just on paper. Real. Lucian closed the photo album slowly. Elena, if we do this, I need you to understand something. I'm not human. I'll watch you age while I stay like this. I'll see you through your whole life. And then I'll live centuries more after you're gone. That's not fair to you. Maybe love isn't about fairness, Elena said. Maybe it's about choosing to care about someone even when you know it'll hurt eventually. You taught me that. With Sarah. Lucian reached for her hand, the first time he'd truly touched her beyond casual contact. His fingers were cool, gentle. Are you certain? Yes, Elena said. I'm certain. They kissed then, soft and careful, two people choosing each other with full knowledge of the complications. It wasn't the dramatic passion of romance novels. It was better. It was real.